belief in a supernatural source of evil is not necessary. Men alone are quite capable of every wickedness. The purpose of Conrad's quote here was to demonstrate the idea of internal sadism and darkness that resides within all men. There's no need for the belief in a power outside of our realm that can act as forces of evil greater than ourselves. In 1890, Joseph Conrad was an active sailorman and voyaged along the coast of the Congo River while serving as the first mate on a Belgian steamboat company ship. Heart of Darkness, written by Joseph Conrad, is based on those past experiences. The novel here is centered around Marlowe, the protagonist, who is well as a steamboat sailor, employed by the company, which is just the name of the company is employed by. And he sails up along the Congo River in search of Kurtz, our main antagonist, while witnessing acts of cruelty and abhorrent treatment. So, my name is Birkhead, and as mentioned before, my literary analysis was written on Heart of Darkness, written by Joseph Conrad. So, the main analytical components I'll be analyzing today are the contrasted imagery of light and darkness that Conrad uses, the irony of the native people's depiction, and imperialist oppression. In this novel, Conrad uses the contrasting imagery of savagery in the dark-skinned natives and to differentiate and uplift the white colonizer's social image and bring light upon the irony of Europeans' actions. He employs this portrayal to belittle and dehumanize the native Africans while uplifting the social image of the white, pure Europeans. To emphasize this contrast, Conrad's setting of Africa is depicted as a lawless jungle, governed by the natural order of the world and not by a civilized system of power. His description and juxtaposition of the two races underlines their differences as well as highlights the difference in their color. The intended purpose of Marlowe's and the company's abhorrent treatment of the alleged savages is to colonize and introduce a higher level of civilization, but in the end, they just cause more harm than good. This can be seen in the quote, "I was laughing about you, hindering you fellows in your work, and invading your homes, just as though I had a heavenly mission to civilize you," quoted by Conrad. The white colonizer's sense of self-importance and superior way of living has warped the perception to make them truly believe that their campaign of brutality is coming from a morally just high ground, despite the conquering and slaughter. Marlowe described his traveling with the Congo River as like going back to the earliest beginnings of the world, and how the Thames has once been a place of darkness, but is now in light and peace. Conrad uses the parallelism of these two rivers to demonstrate the light and betterment that the European colonization has brought, contrasting the natives' unrefined, beastly way of living. The river as well represents movement and journey towards the interstation. Essentially, Marlowe is tasked with traveling the interstation in pursuit of Kurtz. As Marlowe sails along farther down the river, he describes being able to see denser foliage and fog, as well as ultimately discovering Kurtz's home surrounded in severed heads of the Africans. The Congo acts as a portrayal of Marlowe's gradual experience of barbaric conflicts between man and beast, though in irony, most of what he is experiencing is the result of the company's actions and his own. The Europeans' campaign of colonization is deemed to be for the betterment of the uncivilized, though in reality, it's a distorted illusion of brutality and mistreatment. Kurtz, the pivotal antagonist in the novel and physical symbol of humanity's dark nature, realizes the corruption and dies with his last words being the horror of the horror. Kurtz's exclamation was his last realization of how depraved humanity really is, and looking back, was able to see through the illusion that their mission posed, in the name of progress and introducing civilization. He is able to identify that the crimes committed were the result of his lack of self-control or the inner darkness that is in every human, and can be seen in the quote, "deterioration of the white man's morale when he is let loose from Europeans' restraint, and to make trade profits out of the subject races." Without societal standards to govern their actions, the men of Europe, including Kurtz, exposed their true selves to the abhorrent treatment of the natives. Marlowe later on confronts Kurtz's intended fiancée after the expedition and describes the last words he pronounced was "your name." Marlowe's lie has held the purpose of sparing the fiancée's feelings, as well as keeping her under the illusion that their love occurred in Kurtz's final thoughts before death. In actuality, Marlowe lied in order to cover the company's altruistic motives and to shun the truth of what happened. By not facing the facts, he is ignoring the injustice of his mission and ignoring the potential darkness within himself, which is born through the witness of repulsive crimes and his enablement of them through his lack of intervention. So, the stock market is notoriously known as the most capitalist facet of America, and in its earlier days was known as the most ruthless market, filled with heartless traders who would take advantage of the ignorant and innocent. Conrad of Heart of Darkness was condemning the capitalist mentality of Belgium and how they took advantage of the oppressed and the weak. So for my senior project, I learned about how the stock market works in terms of function and how trades are made in order to gain experience. I shadowed with a longtime trader, Joan Hanover, but unfortunately she lives in Idaho. So we kept all of our contact restricted just to phone calls, emails, and texts, and I wasn't able to get any in-person pictures with her. That'd be a little bit of a trip. A portion of my time was spent learning basic terminology, establishing a portfolio based off of a history of trades, and assessing different trading strategies. Many different ways of trading have been established, as well as different mediums of investing, such as bonds and stocks. The goal of this project essentially was just to establish a history and a general understanding of the stock market. So the stock market is a relatively easier project to jump into than is usually perceived. A lot of people have the concept that it's only for people who have large sums of money or already some amount of financial experience. And so of course it's better to go in knowing what you're already doing so you just don't lose all your money within the first couple weeks. But many can learn just by playing around and gaining their own experience through action. The hardest part I'd say about this project was starting to trade, taking the first step of buying a stock and then overcoming that fear of losing. And with the stock market, I learned that there are no monetary gains or experience obtained without some form of loss. And so obviously I'm a student and I don't have access to limitless resources. So in order to compensate for that, here on the left is an image of a market simulator that I use. It essentially just reflects real-time data of stock conditions and allows me to make trades at a moment's notice rather than making certain trades that are called puts and calls where it sometimes take a couple of hours or minutes for them to process. It also allowed me to start off with $10,000. As you can see, I kind of dipped below that. But I started off with $10,000 to invest with, so I don't risk any out-of-pocket loss. And so the stock market, like life, is pretty unpredictable, which I ended up learning the hard way. The FANG, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, essentially the main titans of the stock market in terms of value, hit a bear market, meaning their value went below 20% over a course of 6 weeks, and that 6 weeks is when I was doing my project. And so that could be read as a dip in the health of the market or a possible opportunity for comeback. And so during that experience of the 20% loss, I had put some shares into Apple and Amazon, so I did take a hit overall in my assets, but after the drop, there was a next day flip where the Dow Jones, which is essentially an index number representing the health of the 30 most heavily traded companies, rose 400 points, which is essentially pretty high. Another company that I scouted earlier was Tilray, which in the past, when it first went public, was proven to be really volatile. It jumped and received like up to 300%, so extremely high for new companies. And when I traded with it within my 6 weeks of the project, I witnessed jumps and dips of around 40%, which isn't as much as 300, but it's still a significant amount. And so there's also all kinds of factors that you can't really account for that will affect the price of stocks. So I did invest in companies based in Canada by the name of Tilray and Aurora, and their value actually went up after Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, recently resigned because of his staunch prohibition to a certain substance that I won't name here. But with this project, I felt that I pushed past my comfort limits and I overcame some small fears in order to accomplish goals that I set for myself. I was able to learn on my own and prove that I can lead and manage a small project by myself, effectively demonstrating my independence. So for my future outside of South, I'll be continuing my schooling through RCC and living here in the Valley. I've made the choice to leave my current job at Road Credit Union and just branch off from the financial field. I'm currently taking a course and experimenting with some cloud-based software, and the course is the first step in for me becoming an administrator and then receiving my license later down the road. And so finances will always hold my interest as a career later in life, but at the moment I feel I just need to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of me. Thank you. Any questions?